summarize, although happy to answer other questions at the end of the presentation. We just need to get this to work. Okay, so basically the whole idea of this study was to identify those characteristics that a Bachelor of Accounting apprenticeship would need to have for businesses to subscribe and fund those sorts of study programs. We chose Bachelor of Accounting because Tipu Kinga had, not long before this, released the Unified Bachelor of Accounting degree. And so whilst it wasn't the ideal subject for this study, because it's rules-based, and that presented some issues which I'll talk about later, it was the one most likely to have critical mass, given that the unified nature of that program. The standard research starts with literature review. It's important to note that I, right from the start, looked at the UK as the model. They had recently published a Bachelor of Accounting apprenticeship. They hadn't, at the time that I started this project, they hadn't accredited any institutions to deliver it, but it has in the past year at least had some success. Two assumptions that were important to the study. One was that the model used by EIT for the business internship was an appropriate model to use for this study. The business internship is a semester, a 45 credit level 7 course, where a student is hosted by an employer, but it typically also includes another 15 credit course running in parallel, and that 15 credit course is either blended or on campus or totally online. But it did allow some of those same characteristics to be brought into play when we're talking about a 360 credit degree program. And the second was that the learning and delivery assessment methods used were viable from a provider's perspective. So I did have to make some assumptions about what would work best for employers, particularly at the start in the consultation phase of fieldwork. And the base assumption was that those methods that I proposed would be viable for a provider of a business apprenticeship study program. Again, for a master's project, it had some limitations. I mentioned the technical nature of accounting. There is only a semester to do the work. Hawke's Bay isn't huge, relatively small sample. It was a convenience sample in that it had to be organisations that were within easy reach for me. And it just happened that they were all members of CANS. That wasn't one of the selection criteria, but it just happened that they all actively participated in the CANS training programs. Some were accredited CANS trainers, but all of them followed the professional development regime, etc., that CANS requires. It was about a single delivery model, so that we used just the business internship at the core, and my sole focus was on employers. Again, nothing new here. It was exploratory research. It was a voyage of discovery, a journey. I did iterative quality analysis, so the field work was iterative. Did work, changed the model if needed, went back to the participants, reviewed that, and then did the next piece of analysis. Obviously, data collection and thematic analysis. The participants, as I said, small sample, there are only 4, but fortunate to get a wide variety in terms of functions. Commercial enterprise, so the organisation one had a significant number of companies that it oversaw, a decent size staff, 500 plus, a good number of accountants on staff. Organisation 2, no guessing who that might have been, given I was based in Napier. Organisation 3 was one of the local authorities, and Organisation 4 was a local consultant company, well, international in the sense that it was actually Australian-based, had subsidiaries in New Zealand, Pacific Islands, Papua New Guinea. Again, they had critical mass in terms of accountants on staff. That was important for the study, to get the widest possible views on what might work or what might not work. I don't expect you to be able to read all of this, but what I did was I mapped all of the components of an apprenticeship degree and categorise them by participant. So provider on the left, apprentice down the bottom, employer on the right, and where an activity crosses the boundary between 2 or more of those entities, then obviously 2 or more participants were involved. The focus for my study was the right-hand, I don't know what you trident, I guess you call it. It's not a quadrant, is it? So I was particularly interested in those things that the employer was directly involved in. In terms of the approach, as I said, it was iterative. I ran workshops with each of the each of the participants separately, divided the scope into 2. So there were 2 primary focus groups. There were lots of smaller meetings to tease out detail, but in the main, did all of the initial focus groups with all 4, reviewed the model, then went back to the second group of candidates, participants, to confirm the changes to the outcome from the first cycle, and present the second, discuss that. And then there was a final report back to those participants with what I thought the final model should look like, and their feedback was taken into account in the final report. Am I going too fast? Okay. So out of that, what would definitely work for the business? So the business overall were quite positive about the exercise. They all believe that they would employ accounting apprenticeships if that type of study program was available. But we got high level of buy-in to these items. The apprenticeship specification I've bolded, it's and there's a little bit more detail on that later, but the whole of this program was based around being able to define for both the provider, the employer, and the apprenticeship, what was going to happen when, who was responsible for it. The whole way through, the student was responsible for managing their own study, but obviously employer and provider had specific responsibilities to ensure that the study program was successful. Things like the need for workplace staff to be trained. They were very keen on work-based assessment and the amount of work-based assessment that was being proposed, which was quite significant. We'll talk about some of these other things in a little bit more detail. But I guess the most important point was that the employers never disagreed with anything. There was nothing that was taken off the table. which was a positive. So the apprenticeship specification basically had the characteristics you can see on screen. The base assumption was that each provider-employer apprenticeship combination was considered unique. So even if you had two apprentices starting with the same employer, the same provider at the same time, that their study programs would still be different. Because they'll get assigned to different teams in the organisation, so their primary study topic would differ. And of course, people learn at different rates. And this is more so in a work-based learning environment than, for example, on campus. So in terms of accounting, all of the employers agreed that the apprentice would be assigned to a team, and they wanted that assignment to be no less than 12 months. What that meant was that for the apprenticeship to be successful, there was an assumption that you needed to take the learning in that the primary discipline for that team from level 5 to level 7 while they were there. Didn't make sense that you'd only do level 5 or even level 6, level 5 at 6. In 12 months, they moved to another team and then required to do level 7 learning, and they're no longer in that team. The specification itself was a 4-quarter rolling forecast of both study and work, so it allowed the provider to see where the more intensive work periods were so that they could avoid assigning unnecessary levels of study to the apprentice. And equally, the employer could see what was coming up in terms of the academic calendar and have some idea of what changes they might need to make to the apprentice's work program to best fit. The other thing that was apparent in accounting, and I guess it happens in other occupations, things like end of financial year processing is typically a 6-week period where the apprentice wouldn't be available for any study. When we look at work-based learning, as I said, employers don't want to keep moving apprentices around just to meet an academic calendar. So the business calendar became the prime driver for the scheduling of learning. The other thing is that when it came to the chartered accounting firm, the consulting company, they wanted the apprentice to stay in that service line for the duration of the apprenticeship. The difference with them is that they had anticipated that they would only take an apprentice on after they had completed 18 months of the Bachelor of Accounting degree program. So they had no interest in taking an apprenticeship out of school, an apprentice out of school. Those were the main points in terms of that slide. The work-based learning would need to address more than one learning outcome. So in order to ensure that it would be possible for an apprenticeship degree to be completed within 3 years, and it's worth noting that in the UK, they can take up to 6 years for a 3-year apprenticeship program. But in order to do it within 3 years, you need to be able to use work activities for as many learning outcomes as possible. And there's a discussion needs to be had around modularizing learning for an apprenticeship. So get away from 15 credit courses and look at how they might be modularized such that they're done in 5 or 10 credit blocks. Obviously, there needs to be some agreed regime in terms of study time. I took the UK model where 80% of the apprentice's time is in productive work, leaving 20% employer-funded learning. That will vary, of course, tends to be a little bit more than 20% in year one, less than 20% in year three, because they get more into research-based learning. But there's another slide on that a little later. There needs to be lecturer-directed study outside of work hours. So again, it requires an agreement between provider and employer as to how much out-of-study learning is required. That will be influenced by the number of work hours the apprentice has. Again, in the UK, many apprentices only have a 30-hour work week. It's that kind of thing needs to be taken into account. But the lecturer-directed study is typically for those subjects that aren't able to be learned at work. And then self-directed study is really no different to that which students already do in a non-campus course. I said before that the academic calendar won't work for these employers, and so there's a need for a collaboration between provider and employer to agree how long is reasonable for a learner to understand both the technical skills, build the technical skills, and understand the academic learning, so that there is still some logical and measurable progression of study throughout the apprenticeship. In terms of assessing the quality of work-related outcomes, I've got another slide, and I'll cover that in a little bit more detail. But it is important that the employer be heavily involved in attesting as to the competency of the worker. And an apprenticeship leans a lot more in the employer space than in the provider space, although the provider does need to specify the standards that need to be met to allow credits to be awarded. It's no different to any other work-based learning, though. The student apprentice would maintain a portfolio of evidence, and that type of evidence and the assessments of it would rest with the provider. When we look at the on-campus Bachelor of Accounting degree versus the proposed Bachelor of Accounting apprenticeship, as a result of what I've already covered, they're going to be quite different. We're all familiar with on-campus degree programs. But for a Bachelor of Accounting apprenticeship, the employers were quite clear that they wanted the learning to happen over 46 weeks. So if you allow 12 days public holidays, 4 weeks of annual leave, more or less, you end up with 46 weeks on the job, and the employers wanted the whole of that 46 weeks to be used to best advantage. But again, for the participants, other than data analytics, there were 4 subjects that would absolutely have to be done either on campus or online. Data analytics, the consulting company would be able to accommodate learning in the data analytics space. The others were less sure that they could support that. So there's a question mark around whether data analytics could be successfully delivered for most accounting companies at work. All the others, there was no reason why they couldn't be achieved in the work-based learning. When we come to delivery, again, on campus is straightforward. For the apprenticeship, again, the academic calendar goes out the window, but it's more about aligning theory with when the apprentice is actually doing that work. They talked a lot about seconding apprentices to other companies so that they could be exposed to other accounting disciplines that weren't available in their place of employment. The involvement of the lecturer is quite different, and again, more one of academic supervision than academic delivery of learning. And the participants were very keen on regional weekend workshops, and that we're happy to fund those. We're happy to fund the apprentice to attend those. But they saw the opportunity for those apprentices in a region to get together every now and then, share learning experiences, what worked, what didn't work, to be able to do tutorials or lab work, that kind of thing. In terms of assessment, again, on campus as it's always been. Obviously, for the apprenticeship, if it's theoretical learning delivered online or on campus, then that's no different in terms of how that might be assessed. But for all of the work-based learning, the proposal is that it would be a tested work-based assessment against a provider-defined rubric and supported by a portfolio of evidence. Again, leads to a significant increase in overhead for providers to provide apprenticeships. We did talk about the 80-20 as an 80% in productive work and 20% in employer-funded learning. The participants didn't think that was likely to work. They saw that, particularly for school leavers, there was an advantage in them doing a whole lot of the foundational courses, getting them done early. And they thought that might require a higher percentage of off-the-job learning than 20%. But as the apprentice advanced in terms of their competency, they'd learn more and more while they're actually doing the job. Advantages and disadvantages. I mean, for the employer, all of the participants recognise that they will learn if they have to teach others, and that's their experience with the CANS professional development anyway. They saw apprenticeships as improving likelihood of staff retention, that having an apprentice for 3 years, that they would build some loyalty to the company and be more likely to stay. They saw it as a potential to compete with others for apprentices. They saw that it would remove the current problem when they recruit a Bachelor of Accounting graduate. They typically go through a 12 to 18 month retraining exercise when a graduate starts with an accounting company to basically unlearn the generic models and focus on the business-specific variance. So different accounting software, different customer or client expectations, all of those sorts of things. And they were all keen on the research project, saw that as an opportunity to do something that they'd never been able to do before, and have the advantage of an academic supervisor overseeing that. Disadvantage, obviously, is mostly around cost. Paying the enrolment fees, 20% time off. The consulting firm thought that they would simply pay 80% FTE, and the employee wouldn't be paid for them. They didn't think the employee would be paid for the study, but that's just one participant's opinion, of course. And they do need to free up resource for tutoring, coaching, and mentoring the apprentice. Sorry. Oh, the heading is wrong. Sorry, bear with me. I'm sorry, I've duplicated the same slide. The advantages for the provider were mostly around being able to expand revenue streams, so that they get students they wouldn't normally get. The prime advantage for the employee was earn as you learn, but there were also significant advantages when you look at UK in terms of entry level. So a lot more disadvantaged people get taken up into apprenticeships where they would never have the opportunity to enroll in a university program. So in terms of findings, all of the employers agreed that an apprenticeship could be viable, but didn't think that 3 years would be long enough for some. They all look forward to having a more proactive relationship with the provider. But the big issue was, unlike a business internship where the provider convinces the employer as to what work-based activity they'd want the intern to be involved in, for an apprenticeship, it's got to be the other way around. The learning has to parallel the things that the employer needs their apprentice to do. Maintaining productivity for the apprentice, particularly in the first year, was seen as a potential issue. But that if the provider can get the learning right, sequenced right, then that can be shortened and productivity should be manageable. And the other thing is that providers have a duty of care, pastoral care, for all their students, whether in work-based learning or not. But of course, under employment law, the employer is responsible for their employees. So there needs to be some agreement as to how they might manage pastoral care and how they might share personal information. So it would be important for an employer, for example, to know if the student was struggling with their on-campus learning. Equally, it would be important for the provider to know if the employee was having problems at home or that kind of thing. But there are some issues around sharing personal information. So it needs to be some review of policy settings. And then this final point, providing equivalence of apprenticeship degree. Most of the employers saw an apprenticeship as being something less than a bachelor's degree, even though they did a similar study program, even if they got 360 credits, they still didn't see it as being equivalent. And they think that's because of the term apprenticeship. They kind of preferred a work-based learning degree or a work-based degree, that kind of language. But the other thing, that when you look at assessment, on-campus students can achieve a 50% mark, a C grade in every subject, and be awarded the Bachelor of Accounting. to get a pass from the employer for work-based learning, they're going to have to be something like 90% competent or more in that technical skill. The standard for employers is much, much higher. However, the learning in the workplace is more vertical because of the streaming. It'll be management accounting, or it'll be taxation, or it'll be audit and assurance. So it'll be heavily weighted towards those streams that the apprentice is assigned to. Where, of course, on campus, you cover the entire breadth of accounting, albeit more generically. So there is a question as to how we might prove equivalence of an apprenticeship degree with what's achieved on campus. Not an exhaustive list, but in terms of what research is still needed, we would have to look at what would a 46-week year of learning look like. Completely different to providers currently, where the 2-semester model is predominant. I've mentioned before that combination of provider, employer, apprentice is unique, so there's significant overhead. How do we minimise that? Which leads me into the dynamic modularization of learning. That we're going to have to identify a way of modularizing. So rather than 15 credit, a 15 credit course, you might have 45 credits that will take the student from level 5 to level 7 in a particular discipline, and it's that entire journey that is assessed and the credit awarded on that basis. And again, when it comes to the equivalence question, when you look at the apprenticeship, higher level apprenticeships in the UK in accounting, they tend to be around practice. So you can get a diploma, an apprenticeship diploma in payroll, for example. So the question arises as to whether, rather than a Bachelor of Accounting, if it's an apprenticeship, it's a Bachelor of Accounting practice, so that you, when the apprentice is applying for work elsewhere, they're going to have to specify what endorsement, as in what that practice was principally based on. Was it management accounting? Was it taxation, etc.? Or would we have an apprenticeship which is basically a 240 credit level 7 diploma of accounting practice? And if they wanted the Bachelor of Accounting, then they do the other 120 credits in those other subjects to generate that broader understanding of accounting. That's it, guys.
Lovely. I think there was a question that came through in the chat from Evelyn about first of all, thank you so much. Lots of really good work there, Doug. I've got lots of things written down to ask about in a moment. The Evelyn's posted a question in the chat about the discrepancy in assessment expectations. Evelyn, do you want to clarify? Maybe
it was just really can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, cool. Just that comment that you'd said where, an employer to attest or agree to something, they're expecting, that 90% kind of knowledge or application of the skill set versus, being able to achieve a C, which obviously dependent on the provider is at a lower grade. It's just, when you think about it, because it's quite common, right, in workplace vet education, it's a kind of 100% as such. to get your competence decision. So when you look at equivalency against that, I guess it's the degree, they're saying it's worth less in practice, but you have to do more to get it. So I thought that was an interesting observation that you'd made. And so I was like, how do you cater for that? Especially if you potentially want to look as a provider at offering a mixed mode. You could be either classroom-led or workplace-led within your degree journey. What does that look like, and how do you cater for that in the matrix and the guidance you give to your workplace mentors and verifiers?
Yeah, I think to a large extent it's actually about managing perception.
Mm.
So it's more about the messages that we sell. I think, yeah, again, it was a high level view of the work that I did.
Mm.
So what I didn't mention in the presentation was that even for work-based learning, there's a theoretical element which is part of that 20% off the job learning.
Mm.
So again, the expectation would be, if someone is going to work in the taxation stream, that they would actually complete a good part of the level 6 accounting and taxation course, and probably focus on that taxation piece in particular.
Mm.
So they would be getting recognition for the academic component.
Mm.
The point being, though, that when they actually do the taxation job, there's no room for mistakes.
No.
Um,
Hence workplace assessment often being at that 100% competence
Yes.
rate, right?
Yeah. And there will be some subjects where, if they are technically competent, you can put hand on heart and say they can't do that without knowing the subject. So let's give them the academic credits. But there'll be others where the work-based learning is actually only, let's say, 60% of what's covered in a particular course. So there would need to be a module, a theoretical module, that they would have to pass at least 50%.
So you saw differences in that in
Yes.
terms of the content covered between the work-based and what would have been a provider-led model.
Exactly.
Well, hi, I'm just wondering, slightly confused that this is about a master's program or a degree. However, from the work-based learning, which I think is great, what about the development of the person, of the graduate, of the person who's at work for resilience and agility and, being able to adapt to the future? It just sounds a bit as if it's all content driven, and I think that's one thing they get at university, is they get maybe slightly more rounded education. I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking, how are these people developing past the skills?
Well, so in terms of your first point, so this was my master's thesis.
Right.
The
Okay.
subject that I used was the Bachelor of Accounting apprenticeship.
Brilliant.
In
Right.
terms of well-rounded people, I mean, that's kind of saying that people don't get rounded off when they're in the work environment.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I've just thought that as it's an academic or a degree or a program, but the sort of thing, if in an apprenticeship program, can they look for, they're not necessarily going to work there forever. So how are they going? And then the requirements, the parameters of working in that particular industry will change over time. So is that sort of included?
Certainly, it wasn't included in my study, and again, my
Fine.
focus was particularly from the perspective of the employer. What would they need to see to subscribe to an apprenticeship program? So I was less concerned about the learner. I was even less concerned about the provider. As long as the learning methods and assessment methods were viable, that was the only test that I applied. This was all about what would it take to convince an employer that an apprenticeship study program would be worthwhile? What would they need to see?
Thanks very much, Doug. Thank you.
I put my hand up, so I'll start talking. Hey, that was excellent, Doug. And I have to say, I'm because we've got these wonderful guidelines coming out on Thursday. I'm both very encouraged and very relieved, having heard what you've just said, that there weren't any huge glaring holes in what we've done. I hope so. That's fantastic. And really interesting to see the focus on this particular topic area and see some of the commonalities I think we've seen across a number of the other programs. I was interested. I put this note in the chat. Did anyone mention it all? I know CANs have got, at least in Australia, an apprenticeship-based program that allows people to get professional registration, but doesn't require them to complete a degree. Did that come up at all in your discussions with folks?
Yeah, the engagement with CANS was interesting.
Okay.
So I did a presentation to them, to the New Zealand representatives.
Yep.
They were quite happy with what they saw, but weren't convinced that it would be CANS supported. And then about 6 weeks after that meeting, CANS announced their work-based learning program, which pretty much mirrors what I had done anyway. It is interesting. Again, in the UK, from an apprenticeship perspective, they have a Masters of Accounting apprenticeship, which takes people to chartered accountant stage. So, horses for courses, I guess. But I did wonder how much the feedback from the CANS representatives was because they knew about this other stuff and weren't allowed to tell me.
Sure. The other thing, just really quickly, sorry, there's probably good questions. You mentioned in your presentation the need for review of policy settings. Did you identify any in the?
They're in the text of my thesis, yes.
Right. Yeah. Is that published now, Doug? Sorry, I don't know.
Well, in theory, it is.
Okay, we'll go find it.
I don't know where EIT have put it.
Okay.
I'm happy to, if people want to email me, I'm happy to send it.
Thanks.
You'll notice there that whilst I'm a member of the community of practice courtesy of Food and Fibre Cove, I haven't put my Food and Fibre Cove email address up there. Food and Fibre Cove ceases operation at the end of December. I'm assuming that EIT will want to keep employing me. But my private email is there if you want it.
I had a question. I haven't put my hand up. I've just butted in. I was interested when you were talking about the need for kind of a pastoral care understanding, because both, you're absolutely correct, of course, that both the provider and the employer have duties of care towards the apprentice that kind of straddle those areas. Something that we've kind of thought or talked about but have not come to a solution on is kind of the increased vulnerability of, like, if you imagine when you study, you can make some dumb study decisions, you can miss some assessments, you can really muck up some stuff, and then you can kind of get your act together by the end of your degree and be a reasonable student and pass your degree, and the blemishes of your youth don't carry forward with you after your degree, because what you've kind of come to at the end matters. And in the same way, like maybe if you're in like early jobs, like we don't necessarily know at Polytech whether you've turned up on time to work or things, and you kind of get a clean slate in both places. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about how that kind of increased vulnerability, if everybody can see everything, then that kind of creates a lot of pressure in a way on an apprentice to be both like fully on top of their work life and fully on top of their study life. Or potentially, I guess, if we go about it the wrong way, it creates that pressure. Do you have any thoughts about how we deliver that support without creating that kind of tension?
Yeah, so in the model that I developed, and I didn't mention it in the presentation, there would be an apprenticeship agreement, which is a tripartite agreement. So employer, apprentice, and provider would collectively agree that and would sign it. That has to cover things like the sharing of personal information. It has to cover, for example, expectations of the employer with regards to drug use, as an example. Um, of course, the apprentice is being funded by the employer to attend study. It's a reasonable expectation that they represent the employer appropriately. So there's an added burden on the apprentice when they are on campus to behave in a way that doesn't bring the employer into disrepute. So there are all of those sorts of things. It is a different environment. But the only way I think that can be effectively managed is for all three to have an agreement as to what appropriate behaviour looks like. And that, of course, goes right the way through. It would cover pastoral care, it would cover personal information. It would have to cover things like if the employer has expectations as to academic achievement that might jeopardise or not continued employment. So all of those sorts of things would need to be known to the provider, not just in the employer agreement with the apprentice, the employment, individual employment contract. So it is a different ballgame.
I think in there's a really important learner identity piece. I'm an apprentice. I'm not doing my job and then doing some study, and now my life's really stressful because I'm doing these two things. Actually, I'm a kind of worker called an apprentice who spends 80% of my time in the work using my workplace as a context for learning about this industry. And it's the 20% that gives me maybe some of that wider view, the stuff that my employer doesn't do, and the kind of industry and theoretical groundings and underpinnings, right? But it's not, shouldn't, hopefully, and especially with technology assisted tools. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a bit of a tough life. You're not the most productive worker. You're probably not the most highly paid worker.
Yeah.
It's not I'm doing some study outside my work. That's part-time study. That's not an apprenticeship.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Doug, can I ask one quick one? Because you pricked my ears up when you said they didn't want to take school leavers. So, of course, the supplementary question is, what do you want them to have? How old do they need to be? And how much inefficiency do you want in the system? And why can't a school leaver become an accountant? And how much drugs are accountants doing anyway?
So 3 of the 4 were happy to take school leavers. It was only the consulting company because they're worried about the bottom line. So they wanted to be able to engage an apprentice productively from day one. They wanted to be able to put them on chargeable work right from start. So in order to do that, they have to have a good level of starting knowledge. That's why they picked the 18 months into a bachelor's degree before they picked them up.
Oh,
but they were the exception.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I misheard the statistics, so that's pleasing. But of course, that person that's productive and chargeable from day one isn't an apprentice. Would they be?
Well, sorry, that's a definition issue.
Yes, it is. Wouldn't want to be. I don't know. Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation.
I think you're right. It is more an internship, isn't it?
I think that notion that people, employers want folks that have got some basic, competencies and sometimes specific technical skills is something that we've seen quite regularly in the Concove-led pilots. The employers have said this quite consistently. I think, it's a fair point you make, Josh. Absolutely. And there's a lot of definitional stuff floating around here too, but that has been something that people who actually would quite like them to have a year of some, academic, quasi-academic training under their belt before we'll employ them.
It's certainly a feature in the engineering degree where almost exclusively people who are enrolling in the the BEng Tech as an apprentice already have a New Zealand diploma in engineering, which is that fundamentals.
And that's only a 2 year study program, isn't it?
That's a 2 year program, yeah. So
Yeah.
almost exclusively it's ended up, and it's not a technical requirement, but yeah, they've done a 2 year study program, got their qualification, gotten a job, and then come to do the apprenticeship to finish the degree. Yeah. Linda's hand.
You're on mute.
Sorry. When the students finish this degree, apprenticeship degree, do they then have to study for their professional qualifications, or are they within?
So again, no different to a Bachelor of Accounting now. They would be entitled to register provisional member and then begin the journey to chartered accountant. I did say earlier that Bachelor of Accounting wasn't the subject I would have preferred. So the next one we're looking at, hopefully with EIT, is HR, and the difference being that it's a more philosophical. It definitely has rules, employment law, and all the rest of it. But I think there's a lot more flexibility in running that as an apprenticeship than accounting, which is very much dot the I, cross the T type work.
Yeah. Doug, sorry, I may have missed it, but in the accounting degree, are you anticipating writing a new degree for the apprenticeship delivery, or is it delivering the existing degree using an apprenticeship model, sort of alongside the on-campus model?
I would expect the latter. Yeah, I don't see any advantage in creating a whole new study program. There's nothing wrong with the scope of the unified Bachelor of Accounting degree. The test will be degree of coverage for the average accounting company, but I would expect it to be. It would probably need to be more than something like 70%. And I would expect for most accounting firms that would be okay. Most accounting firms do a bit of tax and a bit of management accounting and a bit of audit and etc.